デイナさんの方にですね、いろいろ、今回初来日ということなのでインタビューを、ちょっとしていきたいと思います。ギターの制作することになったいきさつもかなり長い間作られていると思うので、どういうふうに始めたのか教えていただけますか。
When I was in college, I ran into a book at a bookstore, Classic Guitar Construction by Irving Sloan. And it was a picture book, a how-to, step by step. So this was I started in 73, actually, 74, and finished a year later. But it's important to know that back in the day, there was no internet. There were no guitar making schools. But I did have a good book, and my father was an amateur woodworker and had a rather nice woodworking shop in our basement. And my grandfather was a machinist, and he had a machine, full machine shop. So I grew up around tools, and though I never learned to use them, I guess I wasn't intimidated. So I worked my way through Irving Sloan's book and built a classical guitar with some help from my father and my grandfather. And about a year later, Irving Sloan came out with a steel string guitar book.
実際にどのようにしてそのプロのビルダー、ギタービルダーとなっていったのかを教えてもらっていいですか。
Back in the 60s, many people my age went out and bought guitars after the Beatles burst onto the scene. And by the 70s, there were still a lot of guitar players, and their guitars were older and broken down. So the musicians I knew, as soon as friends realized that I was making guitars, they would bring me their guitars. Can you fix this? Can you fix this? Can you fix this? At the time, I was working for an art museum, and I had planned to go to graduate school to learn how to restore art. And I had an apartment full of broken guitars and all the business that I could want. And one day I came to the realization that I liked the people in the music world more than I liked the people in the art world. So I quit my job and repaired guitars for about 10 years, all the while building guitars on the side, occasionally selling them to my customers or friends or whatever.
トニー・ライスさんからなんかアドバイスを受けたりなんかしたって聞いたんですけど。
So the next stage in my repair career came when I met Eric Schoenberg, who was an owner of the Music Emporium and also a performer at the time. And I used to pick up vintage guitars in Boston, drive them to Maine, and then every couple of weeks I'd bring some repairs back and pick up other ones. And one time when I was down there, Tony was playing in Boston, and he had known Eric from earlier. Eric invited Tony over his house to see his collection of vintage instruments, and Eric invited me along. So Tony played in the Northeast a lot, several times a year, and I would always, try to see him, and if I had an instrument that was finished, I would bring it to him, show it to him, let him play it, get some feedback. Tony's usual reaction was, well, this is pretty nice, but it's not good enough. So one time before a show, I actually brought two guitars. I had a Dreadnought, which I intended to show Tony, and I had an OM. And I can't remember whether it was a Schoenberg Soloist or one that I had built, but it was, I had it along for some reason, and I hadn't intended to show it. So after we went through the usual routine of me showing the Dreadnought and getting the feedback. By the way, they kept getting a little bit better each time. Tony finally said, "What's in the other case?" So I brought out the OM. Tony played it and kept playing it and kept playing it, and eventually looked up and he said, "This is the sound you should be going for." So after processing a lot of that, what I realized that he was after in a Dreadnought guitar was a guitar that was very balanced from the top to the mid-range to the bottom. Tony was a jazz player. He played every note on the fretboard, unlike just about any other guitar, bluegrass guitar player. And so the OM naturally has that balance. There's something about there's a magic in that model. Just the relationship between the bottom end, the mid-range, and the top end. And most lightly built dreadnoughts are bottom heavy, at least mine were. Interestingly enough, a larger sound hole changes that, but that changes it. So what Tony's advice was, this is the sound you should be going for. Just put it in a bigger package. And so that set me off on a many years course of discovery to see what I could do, little changes that I could make to make a more balanced dreadnought. And that led to the single scalloped brace.
なるほど。最初のそのソロイストの話ですけど、それがショーンバーグギターの OM カッタウェイ。ショーンバーグギターのそのどういういきさつでなったっていうのを教えてもらっていいですか。
So as I mentioned earlier, I did a lot of work for the Music Emporium. Eric was one of the three owners of the Music Emporium. They did a lot of business in vintage guitars at the time. In fact, along with Gruen Guitars and Mandolin Brothers, the Music Emporium sort of helped invent the vintage market. So Eric was interested in having a cutaway. Eric started playing, by the way, OM guitars. He was really one of the early proponents of the OM, and he had a nice collection of vintage OM. So he wanted a cutaway on an OM, and so I built him one. So Eric showed the guitar to Chris Martin, who was in town doing a clinic, for Martin at the Music Emporium. And Eric asked him if Martin would build a cutaway on an OM. Well, here's the thing. Martin wasn't even building OMs. So Chris's response was, we might build it, but we wouldn't put our name on it. And actually, that was mostly a bias against cutaways. He thought it was very non-traditional and not appropriate. So Eric said, well, how about if I put my name on it?
ショーンバーグギターはじゃあ、デイナさんがデザインしてマーティン社で作られてたって最初はそういうことなんですか？
Yes, I built the prototypes before we even introduced it to Martin. So I essentially designed the guitar. They were also not using Brazilian rosewood at the time, so we supplied a lot of the wood. They were not making very accurate pyramid bridges at the time, so we supplied the pyramid bridges, and Scott here helped make them.
当時のじゃあマーティン社よりもデイナさんとかの方がマーティンに詳しかったようなところがあるんですかね。
I was probably more knowledgeable. Between Eric and I, we were more knowledgeable about vintage Martin than anyone at Martin.
やっぱりそういうことなんですね。
And at the time, I had an apprentice by the name of T.J. Thompson, who is now, the premier Martin restoration artist. So I forgot to mention the one important thing about the Schoenberg Soloist was that I voiced the tops. Martin would prepare the tops, and I would go down and voice a batch. So that concept has come full circle with Bourgeois Guitar's relationship with Eastman, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
なんていうか今は普通にいろんなメーカーさんが試されてる、スキャロップのブレイスだったりとか、ボルトオンのネックジョイントだとかそういったこととかもデイナさんは先駆けてたと思いますか？
Well, I don't know. I've always tried to take the best of traditional design and sort of improve it. The bolt-on neck came from my career as a repair and restoration artist. I learned that if you build a guitar lightly enough to really sound good, sometime in its lifetime it's going to need a neck reset. And if I'm still alive, I'm going to have to do it. So it had better be easy. Martin developed the scalloped brace, and the scalloped brace means it's scooped in the middle as opposed to straight across. Particularly on the X brace, if there's a scoop, it's lighter right where the bridge is attached. One of the reasons why I went to a straight brace on the treble side was that if you on a new guitar, if you scoop both sides, the top is very flexible for decades. But over time, being loaded under string tension, the top distorts, and it distorts to its stretching point, and then it stiffens up. And when that happens, the tone changes. So a flexible top is bassy, and a stiff top is trebly. So the trick is to build both into a top.
すごくこう先駆けですけど、2012年にはそのエイジドトーンっていう、熱加工した材を使ったっていうのはデイナさんが初めてなのかなっていう話もあったんですけど、その辺ってどうなんですか？
I think we were the first small manufacturer to use torrefied spruce tops. And I know there are a couple of small makers, you know, who used torrefied tops before I did. And the way I was introduced to torrefied tops was there was a company in Canada that used to produce our Adirondack spruce. And the producer, I don't know where he got the idea, but he sent some tops to a local torrefaction kiln to be processed and sent samples out to every major manufacturer. The first time I saw a torrefied top, it just immediately struck me. It as an improvement. So what torrefaction does, first of all, the process is essentially cooking wood in an oxygen-free chamber. And for a short period, the wood is taken up to its combustion point, but the lack of oxygen prevents it from combusting. So the idea is to cook off the volatile compounds, sugars, oils, pitches, resins. And these compounds have the effect of damping vibrations in a top. So interestingly, in a very, very old wood, these compounds are mineralized and gasified over a very long period of time. So if it's done right, torrefaction is just simply artificial aging. If it's done wrong, the process can damage the cellulose structure of the wood. So 12 years ago, I brought guitars with torrefied tops to a NAMM show, and I figured I wouldn't be the only one, but I was.
どれだけでもお話聞きたいんですけど、今矢後さんが何も喋らない状態で終わっちゃう。
なんか歴史の講義を聞いてるみたいな。
で今日ですね持ってきてもらった最新モデルでデイナさんのそのヒストリーを表すような3本を選んでもらったので、ちょっとそれを順番にですね矢後さんに弾いてもらってちょっとお話を聞きたい。
This is sort of a present-day version of the Soloist. This is my 50th anniversary limited edition, and the back and side are Macassar ebony, and the top is Italian spruce. And the idea behind the Soloist was always, very nice woods, but very simple ornamentation.
なるほど。これじゃあちょっと音を聞かせてもらいましょうか。ちょっと
ようやく出番が回ってきました。お待たせしました。僕も普段愛用しているのがソロイストなんですが、この特別な50周年記念モデルは使っている木材とか違うので、
ちょっとやっぱり違う感じですか？
結構違いますね。
マッカーサーエボニーはね特別ですよね。結構ねなかなかない
ですね。ネバーエバーという曲を聴いてください。
Bravo, Ken.
めちゃくちゃいい音ですね。素晴らしい。
This style of playing is exactly what the soloist was designed for. A solo fingerstyle guitarist. You play a melody and a bass line at the same time with these inside moving parts, and they're all balanced. That's the best guitar in the world for it.
素晴らしいですね。早速次のですね、今度はドレッドノートの DB ですけど、これまたデイナさんの方から説明してもらえますかね、このモデルの。
Yeah, this is a dreadnought. I think when Kent plays this, you'll hear that it's also pretty well balanced. In fact, balanced enough that a fingerstyle guitarist can Adirondack spruce top, Madagascar rosewood back and side, and koa binding, wooden binding. Fairly simple appointments. Again, kind of in the style of the soloist.
これもじゃあちょっと
はい、
ね。
コアのバイディングっていいっすよね。
ね、これ近くで見るとすごくとても味わい深い。
溢れてきますね。
でかいです。
はい。
Tony said put it in a bigger package.
OK、Somewhere という曲をきっとお届けします。
素晴らしい。素晴らしいですね。これ重厚なドレッドノートのサウンド、プレイヤーによっていろいろなサウンドが出ると思いますけど、一番新しい試みとして最後のギターがあるんですけど、これをちょっと説明していただけますか。
So this is a Touchstone series guitar, and it's made in collaboration with Eastman. We build the tops and voice the tops in our workshop in Maine, ship to Beijing, and Eastman finishes the guitar. The ones that are distributed in the US come back to us for a little tweaking if necessary, but this one came directly from Beijing.
じゃあこれもちょっと音を聞かせていただいていいですか。
そうですね。